Between the hills, the stars, the sky, the river so clear, river so clear.
And now let us join in a spirit of meditation, reflection, or prayer as we deepen into our service. And I'm going to share opening words for this morning. They come from Pat Irby Litchie. We will be renewed. We come together with our tired minds and bodies, with our confusion and questions, our uncertainties, and our fears. We come together with our hopes, with our pasts, and our ideas, our passions, and our faith. We come together bringing all of who we are, trusting that in gathering, we will be renewed, and that together we can create the world we long for.
We join Unitarian Universalists all over the world in lighting our chalice. Unitarian Universalists have said for centuries that there is room in this religion for all seekers. Skeptics and poets and scientists are welcome here, as are nonconformists and shy and uncertain folk. We believe that restlessness and doubts are a sign of grace, that the love of truth is the holiest of gifts.
So our title this morning, which I think will help us both if I share it, is Evolution of UU Principles and Values, a Living Tradition. We are on the cusp of a moment as we discern what it means to be Unitarian Universalist. Those are the attention-grabbing words of UU Beck Wheeler, inviting us into what she describes as a re-seeing of our core faith statements, an opportunity to discern what it means to be UU. Beck Wheeler is the president of a fellowship in Newport News, Virginia, and is one of thousands of UUs who have been deeply involved in the work of revising Article 2 of the bylaws, which the Unitarian Universalist Association uses to govern itself. But these bylaws are where these core statements, the 7 principles printed on the back of your order of service, and 6 sources are housed. And I want you to know that right now, CJ and I are a little bit of, we're sort of experts right now in this, relative, I think maybe. But really what I want you to know is that CJ has worn a path, in the last 2 weeks, CJ has worn a path between her house and mine. And this is because during that time, through both the golden leaves of autumn and then the snow and slush of this season, she has made it to my doorstep so that we can work together to understand what the proposal for revising our principles and sources is all about. In this learning process, I also feel like I've gotten to know this Beck Wheeler person who I just mentioned. This is mostly because of a video, a very informative sermon she preached about the proposed changes. CJ and I have now watched it numerous times, and we both found her very clear and straightforward. And at some point in the last week, I decided that the best way to impart this information to you was to transcribe her words and share them. And so then I watched it some more times to do that. And so for the next little bit, I will be quoting from that sermon extensively. It's for background purposes. So here's what Beck Wheeler says. For only the second time since our association was formed in 1961, we are re-seeing, reappraising, and rewriting the statements of what it means to be a UU. And today we're going to explore what's going on and why. But don't worry, so I'm still quoting Beck, but I left this line in for Marnie, who's maybe in the children's room right now, but may be able to hear me. Don't worry, this is not going to become some wonky detailed discussion of UU processes. It's just meant as big picture, background, history, context. So did you know that our 7 principles lie inside the Unitarian Universalist Association bylaws? What a place for foundational statements. You might never know to find them there if you didn't know where to look and they weren't reprinted everywhere. And did you know that the UUA bylaws require that we review and consider revising our principles and sources every 15 years? So we are overdue. Our familiar 7 principles that we affirm and promote date back to 1985. This is nearly 40 years ago, almost 2 generations. And in this time, they may have become familiar to you. In this congregation, as I've said a few times, they are printed on the back of our order of service. We have those rainbow colored bookmarks that are floating around, that they're on there as well. But these 1985 principles are not the one and only first and always principles. The 1985 principles themselves revisioned and recast the first set of principles and sources built when the American Unitarian Association and the Universalist Church of America joined into our single denomination in 1961. And if we were to lightly compare the principles articulated in 61 and 85, we would see that many images and sentiments carry over. And right here, I'm interrupting Beck because I want to let you know that CJ has very thoughtfully put together an informative poster, which is up there in the lobby area across from the coats. And so that later, those who are interested can fact check and read for yourselves the 1961 principles, the 1985, our current principles, and also the proposed new values, and see what language carries over. But for now, Beck and I will just tell you that many concepts do carry over. These are the familiar, enduring concepts of dignity, goodwill, the free and disciplined search for truth, and the democratic method. And these came from 1961 into our 1985 principles. And while the principles of 1961 were true to the time of the 1960s and 70s, these principles no longer reflected the worldview 2 decades later in the 1980s. So listen to some of the images from those 1961 principles. Those principles refer to our heritage of love to God and love to man, the dignity of man, ideals of brotherhood, and the cooperation with men of goodwill in every land. Yeah. So time has passed and culture has changed, and we became attuned to issues of sexism and feminism, issues of ecology and the health of our planet, and we needed new ways to express the truth of being Unitarian Universalist. We were due for a revision. And at that time, in the 1980s, as we worked at articulating our core commitments, we did not see it as wordsmithing, as cherry picking. We did not see it as just changing this word or that word. We took it as a time to rethink, re-see, and re-own what it is to be UU in the era of the 1980s and the next generation to come. The result was our 7 principles and 5 sources. The 6th source, being the spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions, was recognized in 1995. So the 1961 principles provided both foundation and inspiration for the 1985 articulations as we reconsidered how we voice our truths in our new generation. We were doing no less than reaching for what it means to live UU in the world and in the language and image of that season. So too now. The UUA convened an Articles 2 Study Commission in June of 2020 to explore and express anew who and how we are UU now in our era. And now I'm done quoting Beck Wheeler for a little while, and I'm going to shift over and I want to share a couple points from that Article 2 study report. So the commission worked for 2 years, and in January of this year, of 2023, released a report. We have it available up front. There's ways you can access it. I'm just going to read some main points. So they acknowledge that the main functions of this article in our bylaws are legal and organizational. It defines who we are in a legal sense and sets up the parameters of the UUA as an organization. However, as the study commission went about their work, they quickly realized that, quote, in addition to these main functions, which are required of any bylaws, there were many other functions that UUs expected it to fulfill. And these include theological. They help us articulate our shared values and theology, or this article. Social. It serves as a shared cultural touchstone. Educational. List concepts to teach and sources to draw from. Personal. Serves as a personal code of ethics. Evangelical, meaning a way to explain to others who we are and draw their interest. Rhetorical, used in public situations to define our beliefs or morality in legal or political contexts. So this is a different set of functions than many organizations expect from their bylaws. And they go on to say, we suspect that this is because we do not have a creed or a confession of faith, which other religions rely on to fulfill these roles. So these functions have fallen to Article 2. It is, after all, the covenant to which all our congregations and covenanted communities pledge themselves when they become members of our association, or UUA association. Another point that emerged for the commission as it reviewed the current principles was the following analysis of how those current principles fall short of achieving the functions that they just named. So to quote, the principles express a shared ethic and imply a certain theology, one that values the individual, growth, the natural world, and diversity. But it does not name these values explicitly, nor does it name many other values important to us collectively. It also gives no guidance on how we might approach living out these values in our congregations and in the world. It declares itself to be a covenant, but the only actions it asks of congregations are to affirm and promote certain concepts. We believe we should expect more from a covenant. As one member put it, we need more verbs. And so for this reason, the study commission intentionally adopted a structure in which we articulate our shared values and then use these values as the ground for aspirational statements of action. And so now, with all that background, and keeping in mind that one of the goals of the proposal that we're looking at today, it did a few more things, but was to move from principles to values. Up comes CJ.
If you would please take out the bulletin insert. Now, I know that you all could take these home and read them, but I think you won't. And so the English teacher in me is alive and well. And I've asked certain people to read each of our values. But on the front cover, the image is that of a chalice. It's the creative image of a chalice. And the overlay is the word love in the flame. The outstretched arms that create the chalice around the core values, form a 6-petal flower. Each arm is a different color. So if you flip your insert over, so the flame, the central core of our values is love. Love is the power that holds us together. It's at the center of our shared values. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. Inseparable from one another, these shared values are, Paula?
Interdependence. We honor the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. We covenant to protect the earth and all beings from exploitation, creating and nurturing sustainable relationships of repair, mutuality, and justice.
And Blaine?
Pluralism. We celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect.
And Janelle?
Justice. We work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive. We covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of system oppression. We support the use of inclusive and democratic processes to make decisions within our congregation and the society at large.
And Dean?
Transformation. We adapt to the changing world. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian Universalist heritage. Never complete and never perfect.
And Pat?
Generosity. We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. We covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith, presence, and resources. Our generosity connects us to one another in relationship of interdependence, and mutuality.
And finally, Christine.
Equity. We declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. We covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities.
So what you've just read is what was passed by the General Assembly of UU congregations this past June 2023. And as your delegate, I attended as a delegate, I voted yes. I attended virtually online with CJ sitting next to me. It was great. But it was not a simple up or down vote. Actually, it was several hours and days because there were a dozen amendments that were being considered to the proposal. But the upshot was that at the end of the assembly, the proposal passed by a majority and there were 5 amendments, and those amendments have been written in, like I included them in what, the amended language is what you just read. And what this means is that, but by passing it this past June, all it means is that now our member congregations are going to take this year to get to know it, to test it out. And at the next General Assembly, June 2024, another vote will be taken about whether or not to adopt it as a whole as a new Article 2 for the bylaws. And for that to occur, it has to pass by a 2/3 majority. So that's where we are now. And we have a year to test it out, to put it to the test. As Rob Spurko, it was one of the members of that study commission, and I watched also a video sermon he gave on it. And as he said, now the questions should be, can we preach with it? Can we teach with it? Can we march with it? Can we reach out with it? So basically, are these values relevant and useful as we are faced with the ethical, moral dilemmas and questions and problems of today? And does this articulation help lead us to action? Aligned action. At our last Growing and Deepening meeting, we've already sketched out a couple more programs to help us get more familiar and engaged with this proposal. So that was a lot of information. That's all we're doing today on it. But I just want to sort of close with the idea that by engaging in this process, we are witnessing and actually participating in one of our defining characteristics as a faith, that of the living tradition. And Beck Wheeler, again, will remind us that we do not etch in stone our faith precisely because we hold sacred that it must change. As we adapt to new challenges, our expression of what it is to be a UU likewise embraces new understandings and evolves based on new experiences and connections. Also, in concluding the study process in the report, the study commission's report, it closed with these words from UU theologian James Luther Adams, who has said, "A living tradition is not bequeathed through some law of inheritance. It must be earned, not without dust and heat, and not without humbling grace."
The thing that confuses me is that when I was gone working in Florida and attending the Orlando Unitarian Church, they had a program and a process to adopt an 8th principle. And now I'm confused about what is that a competing idea or something that is a flash in the pan, or what? Can you?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So I encourage you to take a minute to look at that poster board up there, which has a ton of information. But basically, the proposed 8th principle, the 8th principle has been adopted by individual congregations all over.
Okay.
And it is listed on there, and the language from, you will see part of there was a slideshow presentation resources that we printed out, some of that show for each of our current 7 principles and also that 8th principle. So it lists all 8 of them. It shows the language of those and how that language has actually, most of it, been converted over into the
6 values.
The
Okay.
values.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the value of justice is where a lot of that 8th principle language resides now.
Yes, in the 70s, it was the kind of the flowering of the women's movement. But you're totally right. The LGBT issues have come to the forefront much more recently. I like the values, and I like that each of them has we covenant to. In other words, what are we going to do about those values, rather than just espousing them? It can give us a plan of action. And when Reverend Elizabeth left, she encouraged us, don't try to take on the world. Do some things and do them well. And I think this gives us the ability to pick a value at a time and do something well with it.
And so over the next year, until General Assembly, which is at the end of June 2024, we have an opportunity to do more study and to prepare our 2 delegates how to vote. General Assembly this year will be 100% virtual. So it's in 2024. In its extinguishing the chalice today, I am using the words that Mary found from reading a sermon of Betty Mills from the early 60s. And it's the words of Reverend Earl Holt. It really, really matters very little what you believe, if that's as far as it goes. What does matter are the beliefs that you express. We believe in education, so we build schools. We believe in medicine, so we build hospitals. Schools and hospitals are one way of expressing such values, but they are important ways. Values are important only as they are embodied and expressed in some concrete action and form. Thank you. Go in peace.
Put